So our third session is all about what is happening around the world. As the world navigates through unprecedented geopolitical realignments, economic uncertainty, AI disruption, and the escalation of cyber conflict, cybersecurity has emerged not only as a technical discipline, but as a strategic imperative shaping the global policy, commerce, and stability. And I strongly believe that cybersecurity is a global imperative, and discussing resilience and innovation in an era of geopolitical shifts is extremely critical. We have really distinguished panel today with me, focusing on these topics. So let's invite Val Mukherjee. Please come on. Val Mukherjee is a global cybersecurity authority, serial entrepreneur, investor, and philanthropist. He's a chairman and founder for Cyber Future Foundation, a global platform which is connecting private and public sector leaders with cybersecurity experts. I also have with me Kavitha Mariappan, who is a seasoned cybersecurity and technology executive with a proven track record in category creation and scaling revenue across growth stage to global enterprise. She currently serves as a Chief Transformation Officer at Rubrik, where she leads customer success, cyber risk, innovation, and executive engagement. And finally, I have with me Katherine Kuehn, a global risk executive, currently serving as a VP of Global Cyber Advocacy at Worldwide Technology. Please take it over.
Thank you, Monica. Great to have you all, Kavitha.
Thank you.
Kate.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Thai community, for giving us the opportunity to actually talk about something that's pretty much shaping the world as we go. From the lens that we see, I will probably jump right into the topic with Monica doing the introductions about what shapes the ideas of tomorrow and how we can build towards it. The word polycrisis, if you look for it in the dictionary, probably not going to find it, because that's something that came up in the discussions for the leading up to this panel. And we've been trying to frame the world that we live in, right? The disruptions that are there and combination of the geopolitical issues that we are seeing, whether it's from Ukraine to Middle East to Asia Pacific now. We are living in a very interesting world. There is disruption. Not only AI is the world for at least the time being, but I think we'll also see the humanity is also shaping up in a very different, interesting way. And this is a room full of entrepreneurs, fearless leaders who are ready to take on the challenge. So we thought we'll focus on how do we define the channel and the course of action in front of us. So there are a couple of projects that we do from the CFF side, which kind of inform this. We'll talk it through this process. But first one, I'll go right into the crux of the topic, the era of polycrisis, and from the doom and gloom that could emerge from that, how can we make sure that we are able to build a world that's safer for us, for our children, and the next generations to come. So I have two really amazing leaders, and both in terms of technology transformation as well as in terms of geopolitical as well as policy transformation that both of them can represent. So my question, I'll start with Kate, you on the far end, about how do you see the geopolitical shifts actually changing the landscape in terms of risk calculus of the companies, and what should CEOs, and especially those that are entrepreneurs here taking on this challenge to build a new business or expanding their business, think about?
We've seen really kind of three shifts this year from a geopolitical standpoint. So not new news. We always focus on China. We focus on Russia. And there's a lot of focus right now, too, on emerging threat that's coming really from reputational attacks in some countries starting to come back up into looking at ransomware in new and interesting ways. From a CEO and a risk lens, if you're looking from a corporation standpoint, there's really two trends that I'm focusing on a lot this year. First is we've seen an acceleration of the Chinese 100-year war. We do expect that there will be some type of disruption in the U.S., probably around the 27-28 timeframe. And infiltration of the typhoons into critical national infrastructure is something that every organization should be paying attention to. From a supply chain perspective, an understanding of what your appetite is from a risk perspective and how you fit into those supply chains. We've seen it with Salt Typhoon this year in the telecommunications industry, but we also saw it with Flax Typhoon last year in the financial services industry, which resulted in the first cyber active war, which was when Flax Typhoon actually attacked U.S. Treasury. We attacked back. It's the first time we've had a nation state actually attack back on U.S. soil. Other quick thing to think about is there's a lot of change right now from a geopolitical landscape in how we approach threat feeds and from a threat attack perspective. So we've officially, as a nation, downgraded Russia. The problem is with that is that it also impacts our threat feeds and the intel that we're bringing in. The issue mainly with Russia is that it's the criminal gangs that are doing a lot of the havoc, wreaking the havoc in the U.S. And so without that type of threat feed information, it's causing a bit of a destabilization in how we approach. So recommendation I have from a CEO and an investor standpoint is we're starting to have to really think about diversification of getting threat intel, threat feed type or companies from additional Five Eyes sources, whether that's coming from Europe, whether it's coming from the UK, APAC, and others, really starting to diversify how we're getting our information about threat.
Well, no, thank you for starting it from the broad angle of the geopolitical lens we're seeing at. Sometimes we talk about Five Eyes as source of intelligence, Five Eyes, or what it is left off probably is course for us to think. But all of that is also, Kavitha, going to you. You are in the product and space. You are looking to enable the businesses here to actually work safely and smoothly. How does this impact you when you're trying to transform the product to this new world?
Yeah, good question, Val. I think if we start to think about, hybrid warfare, I think we don't see a lot of physical warfare anymore. Let's talk about, when we talk about Polycrisis, let's talk about hybrid warfare. And that is really, the cross between physical and digital war, right? And cyber becomes the first place to hit. If you take a look at, in the last 12 months itself, IT and security leaders are reporting 90% of them have actually incurred at least one cyber attack within the year. And about 75% of them are saying they've had multiple attacks, of which what everybody is coming after is data, right? That's where the critical assets are. That's where your crown jewels are. That's the ability to impair an organization or a nation sits in that. And 60% of these attacks have actually had critical loss of data. So when we think about that, when we think about the landscape, cyber attacks, and these times that we live in terms of the convergence of crises, right? Economic shifts, physical shifts, political shifts, and technological shifts with innovation, all of this is sort of culminating in a place where we are living in a digitized world. We have so many digital breadcrumbs everywhere. We live in this world, and it's fantastic. This is why we're here in the heart of the Silicon Valley. We live and thrive in it. But at the same time, we make ourselves so vulnerable to attacks, right? And as organizations and nations, cyber is now becoming the first line of defense that's being breached. And it's really posing a threat to, I would say, national security, and also, critical loss of intellectual property and national intelligence, right? And I think as technologists, for us, it's really interesting to look at, the landscape that we are actually living today in I would say, contested digital terrain,
sure.
Right? And as such, technology and cyber are really becoming geopolitical surfaces, right, to be attacked.
Indeed, I really like the phrase you coined or termed about the contested digital terrain, which is interesting because, you have physical boundaries, which are also, we are about 18 wars going on around the world. Ukraine is probably one of them. But there is no border in cyber, right? We all live in our own or, so-called digital terrains, which is sovereignty is not the case there, and that is the issue. So, that kind of shapes the world we live in, but that world is also getting influenced by, or has already been influenced by, the next evolution of humanity, I would say, with AI. And how can we make use of AI? You're going to build AI responsibly. This is something that, from a CFF side, we have a responsible secure AI for future program. And within that program, we look at the different, tools and resources and frameworks we have for defenders. So, when you put that geopolitical lens on the responsible building and use of AI, Kavitha, maybe I start with you.
Sure.
From your experience, what do innovators and the built-in security would look like for businesses who are building, entrepreneurs that are building businesses as well as the tech-enabled life that we are kind of in?
Yeah. So, I mean, the fascinating and wonderful thing here is we're living in the age of AI. I know it's an overused term. There is no tech conference where we don't talk about AI. It is, right? And for a lot of us sort of in the world, as defenders, as IT and security technologists or leaders, we're living in a time where shadow AI is present, is prescient, right? At the same time, I mean, the positive side of all of this is there's been about a 300% surge in the use of AI-based tools in the enterprise in the last 12 months, of which about 42% of this would be about, I would say AI/ML. 42% of this would be ChatGPT transactions alone. So you see that it's here to stay, right? It's here to stay. We're building technologies around it. Now comes the scary part of this. 360%, this is from Zscaler Threat Labs, 360% we've seen an increase in about 360% of attacks from just, I would say, AI-driven phishing campaigns. So what does that mean? There's good stuff there. We're building, we're innovating, but we're going to need to defend. And I think threat actors are obviously perpetrating nefarious acts, leveraging AI. So at the end of the day, as leaders, as technologists, I think as builders, we have to start thinking about building risk into everything. Having a risk-driven or risk-innovative mindset in terms of how we build products. I don't think it's a choice anymore for us to actually innovate without having a sense of, I wouldn't say moral code, but this is the epicenter of technology where we innovate, we see a problem, we want to solve it. At the same time, we're starting to live in a world where creating all these unprecedented, risks that come along with our innovation, that we have to start thinking about purpose-driven technology, right? Purpose-driven, creating guardrails around what we build, and how what we create can and will be misappropriated by threat actors.
Indeed.
And so what kind of responsibility should we and will we have in terms of our work being exploited downstream? And if we're thinking about innovating, threat actors, we in the world of commerce not only have to think about building, but we have to think about building for profitability oftentimes. Threat actors don't have a very different motivation around profitability, right? It's misappropriating what you've created, leapfrogging that, and actually using that for a very different economic purpose. And so they're not deterred by board meetings, by QBRs, and all the type of things that we are on a daily basis as we build technology. They are way ahead of us. So I think it's a very interesting time in society for us to really come back and think about the work that we do. How do we not shift risk downstream into the software supply chain?
Indeed, and I think, just to expand on that, we have this, new ways of agents talking to agents and the whole agentic AI conversations that we have been having, and it's like, that pivots to you, Kate, what does the board regulation and the entire governance structure that needs to be there looks like now in this world? Is it going to be my agent talking to your agent and figuring out if this is a good transaction, or the board agent talking?
If I could do agent-to-agent board meetings, I'd be the most happy woman in the world. The reality, though, is we've been through this before. So here's the thing: AI has been around for 70 years since the Turing test. I mean, that's literally, it's been changing our world for as long as we've all been alive. We looked at robotics first, and if you think about supply chain and automation in supply chain, that was a massive shift on how boards, regulatory community, everything started to approach business. Then it was machine learning. And if you think about like the algorithmic trading back in the early 2000s and the impact those kinds of ML models had on, again, board regulatory business, we've been through it. We're now going through the third iteration from an AI perspective when you think about how generative and agentic AI are now starting to transform. So the things that I always talk and coach about is, one, we have to think about regulatory, again, and you mentioned it, from more of a cyber perspective and a trustworthy and responsible use perspective. Because the reality is, and I know this isn't always the most popular thing to say, AI is just technology. We know how to handle technology. So that being said, when we think about trustworthy and responsible, there's 32 global frameworks, and I tasked our teams with actually boiling that down to the main kind of themes across the 32 global frameworks. Understanding and aligning your business drivers for bringing AI into your organization, it's critical to think about it from that perspective. When you think about how you're going to bring AI in or why you're using it and why you need to secure it, it's really for only two reasons. One is cost reduction or optimization. How do you make your employees more effective or your solutions more effective? And two is brand differentiation. It's a question then of, as you look to it, understanding how your traditional technology stack is going to approach, whether you have the right security wrappers and mechanisms to approach and understand how the impact to your business from all areas a board looks at: reputational, operational, financial, human capital. And then the last piece is to ensure that the digital experience you need to have it is in place as well, so that your customers, both your internal and your external, are understanding it. The last thing I'll say on this topic is, as we think about it from a board perspective, cyber now actually is not just about malicious. The role that AI is bringing in our new technology, and I hate the term digital transformation because we're really in a digital revolution, is we now have three types of cyber incident: malicious, mistake, and malfunction. And boards have to pay attention to all three.
I'm changing my title to Chief Revolution Officer now.
I just say risk executive. We could both be that. That'd be great.
I think Kavitha's already dressed for that part with the signature suit. Now all we need to do is stand behind her.
I did it just for Monica.
Oh, gosh. All right. And I think, the AI conversation after listening to May and her teenager, teaching them dishwashing will not probably go out of their vision. Hopefully we can get to a point where we tie these two together: the building responsibly, using responsibly, and someone watching over it and making sure that we are not careening towards this, the cliff and falling over, which the danger is pretty real, right, if you think about it. So great. I think that if you think about the two crises that were not enough, I think the other crisis that we are dealing with is within the industry itself. A cyber industry has gone through so much of I would say, from a tech-enabled, tech-based workforce to such a broad, expansive role. And probably if you equate that to the people who, the doctors and the lawyers, or the accountants, they have a very clear professional role in the world, right? I mean, people understand what they do. If you peel the onion a little bit, even the neurosurgeon, you won't want them to do heart surgery. So it has come to that level in cybersecurity where, you have to have the profession very clearly defined. And, Kate and Kavitha, both of you in your roles, you deal with the C-suite all the time, right? So, we started this program called Professional Association of CISO, which is basically a journey towards building a professional practice for the cybersecurity industry itself, and starting with the top. And we have CISOs who are leaving the job in 18 months or 2 years because it's just too terrible and torturous to have that role. I'll go to you, Kate. Maybe I start with you in this regard. What should cybersecurity leaders and founders kind of think about in this evolution of the roles? But the entrepreneurs and the business leaders, they have to enable them. So what is your thought on making sure that we are successful on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, the role is absolutely changing. And I think about, I've been in cybersecurity now almost 30 years, and it used to be that security was the afterthought. The CISOs were very technical, and it was really about building technology stack. We've now evolved where I very rarely use the term Chief Information Security Officer anymore. I actually use the term risk executives, because the role has evolved, especially as we now bring in AI. We look at compliance, we look at regulatory, where it's really become almost an office of risk. and it's understanding the business risk and then the technology that wraps around the business risk. So as we think about in the future from a board perspective is, what CISOs, what risk executives are facing is now in this climate, there's criminal responsibility if something goes wrong, there's board, there's fiduciary, there's everything. You have to, and this is one of the reasons I love the professional association, is you have to be able to give them the resources, whether that's a board expert, whether that's bringing in additional people to explain what's going on. It's almost untenable for one person to do it all. And I think you should be called a chief revolution officer. I keep threatening my boss that I'm going to become chief troublemaker, one of those things. So it's a question of, as we look at the evolution of the role, it's no longer a technical role. It's very much a business role. Again, we're now dealing with 3 M's. It's not just about malicious, but mistake, malfunction. And that has to do with holistic business process. So giving our CISOs an opportunity to really have the right resources around them is what's going to make the role successful in the future.
Okay. So I think that's probably transcends to now. How do we make sure the organizations we are founding, whether it's a startup, today's world, especially with all this opportunity around AI, there are so many technology companies that are forming. What is your, Kavitha, your experience, like the one thing that you would want to talk about, the boards and the entrepreneurs starting it from the get-go with their cyber initiative?
Yeah, so, and I'm going to be a little contrarian here, so yeah. When we think about assessing the landscape, right? We talk about risk and security and privacy and compliance as very different constructs. Risk being the measure and security being the implementation or solution too, right? I often work with a lot of CISOs, or heads of security, especially I would say who come from the GRC space. They don't understand security architecture. And that is a huge downfall when, especially from an operational implementation perspective, because they've really lived in the GRC world. And a lot of this has got to do with the size, scope of the organization itself, reporting lines, and also how regulated the industry is. If you look at financial sector, if you look at healthcare, for example, highly regulated, and you see the motivation to have hired security under the guise of risk and compliance and GRC. Whereas you start to look at security personnel, where core architecture starts to become really important. And I can't tell you how many CISOs I've interviewed for jobs where I don't hire them because I'm like, or even, and I'll say this, as customers that I've interviewed, customers who are looking to leave to actually take on a job with us, where I interview them and go, wow, now I really have an front row seat as to why we had implementation issues. So I think we have to unpack the role, right? We really have to unpack the role into what those swim lanes look like and really start to think about architecture matters, right? We cannot lump architecture and security, like core know-how, into the world of risk and privacy and compliance. And I think as we start to form boards and we start to create fiduciary oversight, specifically with the board and the executive team and the core risk team, whatever that might look like as a structure within the organization, it really starts to create, transparency. So I ran the office of the CISO at Zscaler for quite a few years. And I'll tell you at one point, and I'm a trained engineer, right? But at one point, I was like, we are sitting here redlining legal documents and working with legal in a world where we don't actually speak legalese. And we have, and this is in any company, right? You have legal interpreting security and technology constructs without, the wherewithal. And I actually went back to law school. And I went back to law school part-time while I did that job as a personal mission because I was like, and I majored in cyber law. My whole thing at that time was we are sitting at the intersection of where skills are colliding. And I felt like, for me as a personal mission, I'm like, we're a little blind here as technologists because, they're very different vocations, but I think these worlds are colliding, right? And we're going to continue to see more and more of that with AI and all, machine learning, all of these, areas. But I also think it's opening up opportunities. So coming back to your question, really, what do we need to think about is, I think multidisciplinary, as much as we need to be specialists, I think these multidisciplinary crossovers become really important, right? It also opens up the aperture for new jobs. When in tech did we think linguists would have a front row seat?
Right.
right? Ethicists, you know.
Yep.
So I think for this generation, we're seeing some fantastic, new areas, avenues for study or like specializations. But really, I think as technologists, and as we have to start thinking about, how much we understand policy, and as business leaders and entrepreneurs, how much do you understand, structure and liability and policy and things like that? As much as we understand technology, we really have to start thinking from a multidimensional perspective in this world.
Indeed, and now I also have and I can probably understand that now we have a qualified legal person with engineer.
Didn't sit the bar.
But very thoughtful.
Too much of an engineer.
Chief revolutionary officer with the chief troublemaker, the chief peacemaker, probably in coming together. Hopefully we can get this
There
going.
must be a startup in the making for us.
Oh, 100%.
I think so.
No, very, very, very interesting. And I think if you think about all that, this Polycrisis actually has a lot of very interesting ways to solve problems. It doesn't have to go to the point where, say, a couple of months back, I was in Ukraine with General Petraeus. We did a trip, and we saw the incredible amount of innovation there, defense innovation. Here we spend billions of dollars. There, they have made the same drone in a couple of tens of thousands of dollars. They have made the same drone. And you know what? It is existential crisis, like their lives are at stake. So the crisis sometimes brings the best in us, and I think brings also the most hopeful to do the best things. So let's talk about resilience. In this case, the infrastructure that we have today, especially in CFF's world, we have invested a lot of time in energy security, healthcare security. Those two areas is what we lead with as think and do tanks. So, startups and investors have an opportunity to build for impact. Right? We walked into this just while we're talking, just coming before this, we're talking about how do we incentivize today's builders and tomorrow's, the future entrepreneurs or budding ones, to actually think about the impact that they would make in the society. Every commercial transaction should lead to an infrastructure for the future, right? So it's about protecting the systems that people rely on. And we talked about PAC also, the Professional Association of CISOs, is a budding institution. But if you think about AICPA, the Bar Association, American Medical Association, all of those are infrastructure that took decades to build up. So, Kate, probably I'll go to you for this one to start with. What models do you see that work, where industry, public sector, and philanthropy in this case, now that a lot of the government funding's disappeared for a little bit, but how do you think those three things can come together to build lasting impact in this case?
We talk a lot about in this industry, platform plays and ecosystems. And so there's a couple of things. With the work that we do with Congress and the work we do in private sector and public sector right now, there's a massive appetite in the public sector for the private sector to step up and do more from a cyber perspective. So take on more from not only a risk perspective, but an education and a community perspective. We're all used to the ISACs. Everyone knows the ISACs. There's also a lot of great organizations, ISSA, ISACA, but the reality is right now, we have to start bringing the organizations together. The work that we do from a private sector, I'll use, business, so the Business Roundtable, large enterprises that come together to talk about multifaceted issues within the industry, not just cyber. If you think about the National Technology Security Coalition, of which I'm the CISO in residence, the CISO community that's actually facing off in Congress to talk about policy, the work you do at CFF, the organizations have to start coming together so that we're creating a coordinated response to the call from the public sector for help in the private sector. This week with RSA, I had a lot of opportunity to meet with the public sector and where, we're headed from an administration and a collaboration standpoint. And the reality is we're going to have to get tighter, but I don't think it's one model, one organization. It's taking the best from the things we've put and established in the private sector, the organizations that the community trusts, and bringing them together to create a more cohesive ecosystem, just like we do, to your point, old engineers die hard, in a platform play.
Yeah.
Indeed. So Kavitha, I'd come to you for advice on startup founders and entrepreneurs. You are taking not just taking organizations to become bigger and more scalable, but also you're probably coaching, and I know for sure you're inspiring a lot of them to think about the future. What would you think they should think from the beginning and plan for a world where impact and bigger infrastructure is part of their playbook?
Yeah, look, I think resilience. Think about startups and think about founding technologies. Resilience isn't a product. It's a process, right? And so we have to embody that in everything that we do and we think about. And it's really a question of not if you're going to get hit or hacked. It's when, right? And that's not a doom and gloom play. It's the world that we live in. And it's so building resilience right from a foundational perspective into everything that we think about. And that's a very different mindset, right? And thinking about building those guardrails and really doing that. But I think the other piece of it is really the public-private sector collaboration, right? I think this is probably the time, and thank you for the work that you do, right? And not just private and public sector, but also not-for-profits. But it's really a time for technologists, to take a seat at the table, because if we do not, we will be regulated and governed by those who do not understand technology, right? And then we will spend more time. And for those of you who are living through the world of risk and audit, you will spend more time on audit than actually building technology, right? And so I think it's really important to think about solving these problems from a macro perspective and what influence you can have. And it doesn't matter that you're a startup founder. Being part of these working groups, actually joining a lot of these roundtables and networking helps you understand, and it also helps widen the aperture to the type of problems that you're solving. For many of us who have even been, fortunate or unfortunate to have spent time in the DevOps world ever, not my favorite, but I did do a tour of duty there. It's a very crowded space. It's a very crowded space, and we're just specifically talking about entrepreneurs. When venture capital is handing out funding, everybody will be a founder, right? Are we really solving problems that are pressing, right? Or are we adding to the distraction and the fragmentation of the landscape itself? So when we think about cybersecurity and we think about protecting infrastructure, specifically critical infrastructure and the software supply chain, let's really think about the problems that we're solving and the role that we can play in terms of really building foundationally for resilient, I would say, infrastructure, APIs, including our code base, right? All of it. And having that sort of wherewithal and mindset in what we do.
Look, at the heart of Silicon Valley is technology. At the heart of technology is all these APIs and now agentic AI. So I'm glad we touched a lot of things together. In fact, navigating Polycrisis all the way to finding resilience, not only resilience of the industry, but of the heart and soul and the impact that we need to have. So what I would leave to you is that whether your product is in AI, healthcare, or finance, if it's not secure, it won't sustain, it won't scale, and it won't be trusted. Like, I think that our trust has been a word throughout the period of all this. So build security from the start. Understand your geopolitical risk landscape. What you're building into this world is quite fragile, but also promising. Think like a policymaker sometimes. If you're the executive and the leader in your organization, you have to think about that. Design like an innovator and lead like a CISO. In some cases, they will help you to build that. So, and in terms of call to action, the Cyber Future Foundation is a nonprofit, just like TiE is. That's how we partner. Join the professional association. If you're a CISO, contribute to rcef.ai if you are an innovator, and apply these learnings for Cyber Board Book if you're a entrepreneur, CEO, or a board member. And this is your moment to lead, not with fear, but with resilience, vision, and trust. So thank you so much for having us. Thanks.
Thank you
round of applause
so
for
much
the leaders
for
here.